Hi, it's Michael Horn here. What you're about to hear is a conversation that Diane and I recorded with Alex Kotran, who is the founder and CEO of AIEDU. What emerged for me from the conversation was a couplefold, but firstly, just how uncertain we are really about where the puck is moving in terms of the future of work and what work is defined as in the age of AI. And as a result of that, the uncertainty that ripples back into how should schools today change, if frankly at all. And that in many ways, the things that we ought to be doing today maybe don't actually change all that much, particularly for younger learners. Now, Alex also points out that a bunch of practices that have been staples in schools are basically dead. Now, banning phones or technology in schools isn't going to change that reality because when kids go home to their houses, they have these tools at their disposal. And so just understanding the world in which they're operating is going to be really important if we're really focused on the knowledge and skills that students are going to need to thrive in the world ahead. Hope you enjoyed this conversation that left me with a lot of questions.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Diane. It is good to see you as always. Looking forward to this conversation today.
Me too. You know what I'm noticing? First of all, I'm loving that we're doing a whole season on AI because I felt like the short one was really crowded and now we get to be very expansive in our exploration, which is fun. And that means we've opened ourselves up. And so there's so much going on behind the scenes of us constantly pinging each other and reading things and sending things and trying to make sense of all the noise. And just this morning, you opened it up super big. And so it works out perfectly with our guests today. So I'm very excited to be here.
No, I think that's right, and we're having similar feelings as we go through the series. And I'm really excited for today's guest because I think there are a lot of headlines right now around executive actions with regards to AI, or different countries making quote unquote bold moves, whether it's South Korea or Singapore or China, and how much they're using AI in education or not. We're going to learn a lot more today, I suspect, from our guest, and he's going to help put it all into context, hopefully. Because we've got Alex Kotran, joining us. He's the founder and CEO of the AI Education Project, or AIEDU. And AIEDU is a nonprofit that is designed to make sure that every single student, not just a select few, understands and can benefit from the rise of artificial intelligence. Alex is working to build a national movement to bring AI literacy and readiness into K-12 classrooms, help educators and students explore what AI means for their lives, their work, and their futures. And so with all that, I'm really excited because, as I said, I think he's going to shed a little bit of light on these topics for us today. I'm sure we're only going to get to scratch the surface with him because he knows so much, but he's really got his pulse on the currents at play with AI in education. And perhaps he can help us separate some of the hype from reality, or at least the very real questions that we ought to be asking. So, Alex, with all that said, no pressure, but welcome. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Sounds good. Well, let's start maybe just your personal story right into this work and what motivates you around this topic in particular to spend your time on it.
I've been in the AI space for about 10 years. But, besides being sort of proximate to all these conversations about AI, I don't have a background in software, computer science. I don't think I've ever written a line of code. I mean, my dad was a software engineer. He teaches CS now. No background in technology or CS. No background in education. And so I had funders ask me this when I first launched AIED. Was like, well, why are you here? Like, what's your role in all of this? My background is in really political organizing. I started my career working on presidential campaign, went and worked for the White House for the Obama administration, doing outreach for the Affordable Care Act and other stuff like Ebola and Medicare, and then found myself in DC. And after I just kind of got burned out of politics for reasons people probably don't need to hear and can completely understand. And so it wasn't that I was so smart to I knew AI was the next thing. I just was like, I really want to move to San Francisco. I visited the city twice and was just I fell fallen in love. And sort of fell into tech and an AI company that was working in clean tech. And so I was sort of doing AI work before it was really cool. It was like back in like 2015, 2016. And then I ended up getting like what at the time was like kind of a really random job that I had a lot of mentors who were like, I don't know, Alex, like AI, like this is just like a fringe, emerging technology, kind of like, 3D printing and VR and XR and the metaverse. Um, is that really like what you should do? And I decided like, I just want to learn. It seems really interesting. And that's why I joined this AI company, essentially working for a family office. For the CEO, it was like sort of a hybrid family office corporate job doing CSR, corporate social responsibility, in the legal sector. This is the first company to build AI tools for use in the law. And so I was sort of charged with how do we advance the governance of AI and sort of like the safe and ethical use of AI and the rule of law. And so I basically had a blank canvas and ended up building the world's first AI literacy program for judges. I worked with the National Judicial College in Stanford and NYU Law, trained thousands of judges around the world in partnership, by the way, with nonprofits like the Future Society and organizations like UNESCO. And because my parents are educators, and my parents are foreign immigrants as well. And so they're always asking me about my job and really trying to convince me to go to law school or get a PhD or something. And I was like, well, no, but I don't need to go to law school. I'm actually training judges. Like they're coming to learn from me about this thing called AI. And my mom was like, oh, like, well, that sounds so interesting. Have you thought about you should come to my school and teach my kids about AI. And she teaches high school math in Akron, Ohio. And I was just like, surely your kids are learning about AI. That's, my assumption is that we're at the minimum talking to the future workers about the future of work. I just assume that, judges who tend to be older, like they kind of need to be caught up. And after I started looking around to see, like, is there other curriculum that I could share with my mom's school, I found that there really wasn't anything. And that was back in 2018, 2019. So way before ChatGPT. And thus AIEDU was born when I realized, okay, this doesn't exist. This actually seems like a really big problem because even as early as 2018, frankly, as early as 2013, people in the know, technologists, people in Silicon Valley, labor economists were sounding the alarms. Like AI is, automation is going to replace like tens of millions of jobs. This is going to be one of the huge disruptors. You had the World Economic Forum talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Really, this wasn't much of a secret. It was just, like esoteric and like, in the realm of like certain nerdy, wonky circles. And there wasn't a bridge between the people that were meeting at the AI conferences and the people in education. And I would really say like our work now is still anchored in this question of like, how do you make sure that there is a bridge between the cutting edge of technology and the leadership and decision makers who are trying to chart a course, not over the next 2 years, which is sort of like how a lot of, I think, Silicon Valley is thinking in this sort of like very immediate reward system where they're just, like they're looking at the next fundraise. But in education, you're thinking about the next 10 years. These are huge tanker ships that we're trying to navigate now. And we're entering, I think this is such a trope, but like we are really entering uncharted waters. And so like steering that super tanker is hard. And I suppose to really belabor it, as maybe AIEDU is sort of like the nimble tugboat, that's trying to just sort of like nudge everybody along and sort of like guide folks into the future. And that demands answering some of this core question of the future of work, which hopefully we'll get some more time to talk about.
Yeah, I want to move there in a moment, but first, like I don't know that all of our audience will be caught up with all the sort of this macro environment, right? Where we sit right now in terms of the national policy, executive actions as it pertains to AI and education. They've probably heard about it, but don't know what it actually means, if anything. And so maybe sort of set the scene around where are we today nationally on these actions? What of it is actually meaningful or impactful? What of it is maybe more lip service around the necessity of having the conversation rather than moving the ball? Just sort of set the stage for us where we are right now.
It's really hard to say. I mean, there's been a lot of action at the federal level and at state levels, and schools have implemented AI strategies. The education space is inundated with like discussion and initiatives at working groups and bills and like pushes for like AI and education. I think the challenge now is like we really haven't agreed on like to what end. Like, is this, are we talking about using AI to advance education as a tool? So like, can AI allow us to personalize learning and address learning gaps and help teachers save time? Or are we talking about future of work and how do we make sure kids are ready to thrive? And there are some that say, well, we just need to get them really good at using tools, which is a conversation I literally had earlier today, where there was like a college to career nonprofit, and they were like, well, we're trying to figure out what tools to help kids learn because we want them to be able to get jobs. I think like AIEDU, like our work is actually, we don't build tools. We don't even have a software engineer on our team, which we're trying to fix. Like if there's a funder out there that would like to help fund an engineer, we'd love to have one. But our work is really systems change, because if you like zoom out, and like this is, I think, where I do have this skill set, and it's kind of like, again, it's a bit niche. The education system is it's not one thing. It's sort of like an organism, the same way that like redwood trees are organisms, like they're kind of all connected, the root structure, but it's actually like you're looking at a forest that looks very different, that's not centralized. Every state kind of has their own strategy. And frankly, every district, in many cases, you're talking about, in some cases, like government scale procurement discussion, just bureaucracy involved. So if you're trying to do systems change, this is really a project of like, how do you move a really heterogeneous group of humans and different audiences and stakeholders with different motivations and different priorities. And so our work is all about, okay, like setting a North Star for everybody, which is like defining where we're actually trying to go. And we use the word AI readiness, not AI literacy, because what we care about is kind of irrespective of whether kids are really good at using AI, like, are they thriving in the world? And then like, how do you get there? Like most of our budget goes to delivering that work, doing actual services where we're building basically building the human capital and like the content. So like training teachers, building curriculum, adapting existing curriculum more so than building new curriculum, but like integrating learning experiences into core subjects that build the skills that students are going to need. And those skills, by the way, are not just AI literacy, but durable skills like problem solving, communication, and core content knowledge, frankly, like being able to read and write and do math, we think is actually really important still, if not more important. And then sort of the third pillar to our work is really catalyzing the ecosystem. And because the only way to do this is by building a movement, right? Like, sure, there's an opportunity for someone to build a successful nonprofit that's delivering services today. But if you actually want to change the world and like really solve this problem on the timescale required, you have to somehow rally there's like 1 million K-12 nonprofits. We need all of them. This is like an all hands on deck moment. And so our organization is really obsessed with like, how do we stay small and almost like operate as the intel inside to empower like the existing nonprofits so that they don't have to all pivot and like become AI. Because like there's just not enough AI experts to go around. Every school and every nonprofit wanted to hire an AI transformation officer. Like there just like wouldn't be enough people for them to hire.
Yeah, they're still trying to all hire a good tech lead in the schools. We're definitely not getting an AI expert in every school soon. Alice, I'm wondering, so you're speaking my language, sort of change management, vision, leadership 101, etc. I'm wondering, sort of not necessarily the place we were thinking we'd go in this conversation, but I think it'd be fun to go like really deep for a moment that I think is related to your North Star comment. What does school look like in the age of AI when kids are flourishing, when young people are flourishing, and when they're successfully launching? I think that's what the North Star has to describe. And you just started naming a whole bunch of things that are still important in school, which are, feel very familiar to me. They're all parts of the schools that I've built and designed and whatnot. And so I think one of the interesting things is, and maybe we'll then build back up to policy and whatnot, but like, what does it look like if we succeed? If there is this national movement, we're successful, we have schools or whatever they are that are enabling young people to flourish. What do you think that looks like?
Yeah, this is the question of our day, right? I mean, I think this is where, just to go back to this like state of play, I think like it's very clear that we are in the age of AI, right? This is no longer some future state. And frankly, like ignore all the talk about AI bubbles, because it kind of doesn't matter. I mean, there's always a bubble. There was a bubble when we had railroads. There was a bubble when we had like in the oil boom. There was a bubble with the internet. There probably will be some kind of a bubble with AI, but that's kind of like part and parcel with transformational technologies. Nobody who's really spent time digging these technologies believes that there's not going to be AI sort of totally proliferated throughout our work and society in like 10 years, which is again the time frame that we're thinking about. The key question is though, like, what is it like? What does it mean to thrive? And so there's more than just getting a job. But I think most people would admit that like having a job is really important. So maybe we start there, and we can also talk about the social emotional components of just sort of like being resilient to some of like the onslaught of synthetic media and like AI companions. And there's other stuff. One of, if not the most important thing, is like how do you get a job and like have like be able to support yourself. And that question is really unanswered right now. And so everybody in the education system is trying to figure out like, well, what is our strategy? But we don't know where we're going. Like we really do not know what the jobs of the future are. And like you hear platitudes like, well, it's not that AI is going to take your job, it's that somebody using AI is going to take your job. Which is a kind of a dumb thing to say because it's correct. I mean, it's like basically like, okay, either AI is going to do all the jobs, which I don't like that actually may happen. Some people say sooner than later. I just assume it's going to be a long, long time if we ever get there. And so until we get there, that means that there are humans doing jobs and AI and technology doing other aspects of work. So like, what are the humans doing is really the important question. Not just like, are they using AI, but like, how are they using AI? How aren't they using AI? Until we get more fidelity about what the future of work looks like, what are the skills you should be teaching? Because like, like I think a lot about like cell phones, and you go back to 2005 and you can imagine a conversation where it's like, and all of this is completely true, right? In 2005, it would be correct to say that, you will not be able to get a job if you don't know how to use a cell phone. You will be using a cell phone every single day, whether you're a plumber or a mathematician or an engineer or an astrophysicist. And yet, I think most of us would agree that like we shouldn't have like totally pivoted education to focus on like cell phone literacy, because like nobody's going to hire you because you know how to use a phone. And AI like probably is going to some degree get there. I mean, it's already sort of there where like, sure, there are people who will charge you money to teach you prompt engineering, but you could also just like open up Gemini and say, help me write a prompt. Here's what I want to do. And it will basically tell you how to do it.
I mean, you've seen this. You might not be old enough to remember this, but I was a teacher when everyone thought it was a really good idea to teach keyboarding in school. It's like a class. What we discovered is actually, if you just have people using technology, they learn how to use the keyboard, right? Like it happens in the natural course of things, and you don't have a class for it. So what I hear you saying is like, your approach is not about this sort of, there's some finite set of information or skill, not even skills in many ways that we're going to teach kids, but it's like, what does it look like to have them ready for the world that honestly is here today and then keeps evolving and changing over the next 10 years? And so where to even go with that, Michael? Because
I mean, part of me wonders, Alex, like if you start to name the things that remain relevant, what like maybe the conversation to have is like, what's less relevant in your view, based on what the world of work and society is going to look like? What's the stuff that we do today that, will feel quaint, right? That we should be pruning from schools. Yeah.
cursive handwriting, that is still hotly debated by the way, but
Although you get like Deerfield prep and they're going back to pen and paper.
Right. So that's kind of where I'm curious, like what practices would you lean into? What would you pull away from? Because that's part of the debate as well. Like our friend Andy Rotherham, I believe at the time we're recording it, just had a post around how it's time for a pause on AI in all schools. Right. I'm not sure that's possible for a variety of reasons, but like, what would you pull back on? What would you lean into? What would you stop doing that's in schools today as you think about that readiness for the world that will be here in your, and we're all guessing, but 10 years from now?
What to pull back on? I mean, look, take-home essays are dead. Don't assign take-home essays. Like the detectors are imperfect. It's like, and as a teacher, do you really want to be like a cyber forensics specialist? Like that's not the right use of your time. And also you're using AI, so it's a bit weird to the dissonance of like, oh, like empower teachers with AI, but then like we need to prevent kids from using it. But I think they're like low hanging fruit. Like, okay, don't assign take home essays. The way to abstract that is students are, you can call it cheating. Let's just call it shortcuts. what we do need to do is figure out, okay, how is AI being used as a shortcut? And whether you ban it in schools, kids are going to use it out of school. And so teachers need to figure out how to create assessments and homework and projects that design such that you can't just use AI as a shortcut. And this is a whole separate conversation, but just like to give one example, having students demonstrate learning by coming into the class and presenting, and importantly, having to answer questions in real time about a topic. You can use all the AI you want, but if you're going to be on the spot and you don't understand whatever the thing is that you're presenting about and you're being asked questions, like, that's the kind of thing where, sure, use all the AI if it's helpful. But ultimately you just need to learn the thing. But like the more important question is like, I don't know if school changes as much as people might think. I think it does change. I think there's like a lot that we know needs to change that is kind of irrespective of AI. Like we need learning to be more engaging. We need more project-based learning. We need to shift away from just sort of like pure content knowledge memorization. But that's not necessarily new or novel because of AI. I think it is more urgent than ever before.
I'm curious, like, because I do think this is also hotly debated, right? Like in terms of the role of knowledge and being able to develop skills and things of that nature. And so I'm just sort of curious, like, what's the thin layer of knowledge you think we need to have, or like Steven Pinker's phrase, common knowledge, right? And what's the stuff we don't have? Like, we don't have to memorize state capitals, right? Maybe.
No, yeah, I don't think we need to memorize state capitals because, yeah, but keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious now. It's like, right, like as we think about, because we do have this powerful assistant serving us now, and we think about what that means for work. But I guess I'm just curious, like, what does that really mean in terms of that balance, right? Of like, what is all knowledge learned through the project, or this, how do we think about, and it's a lot of just in time learning, perhaps, which is more motivating. I'm curious, like, how you think about that.
I think this needs to be like backed by like research, right? Like sure, it probably is right that you don't need to memorize all the state capitals. But then I think you start to get to a place where like, okay, well, but do you even need to learn math because AI is really good at math? And I think math is actually a good analog because I don't really use math very much, or I use relatively simplistic math day to day. I think it was really valuable for me to like have spent the time building computational thinking skills and logic. And also just math was really hard for me and it was challenging. And like the process of learning a new abstract hard thing, I do use that skill. Even some of the rote memorization stuff, my brother went to med school and like they spent a lot of time just memorizing like completely just like every tiny aspect of the human body. They like have to learn it. It's actually like, I think doctors are really interesting. A great way to kind of double click on this, because if doctors don't go through all of that and don't understand the body and go through all of the rote process of literally taking like 1,000-question tests where they have to know like random things about blood vessels, and even if they're never going to deal with that specific aspect of the human body, doctors kind of like build this sort of like generalized set of knowledge. And then also they spend all this time like interacting with real world cases, and you start to build instincts based on that. And you talk to hospitals about like, oh, what about, AI to help with diagnosis? And one of the things I hear a lot of is, well, we're worried about doctors losing the capacity to be a check on the AI, because ultimately we hear a lot about the human in the loop. The human in the loop is only relevant if they understand the thing that they're looped into. So yeah, so like, I don't know. I mean, maybe
You're onto something. You're spurring something for me that I actually think is the new thing that we don't do and haven't been doing and aren't talking about. And that is this, let me see if I can describe it as I'm understanding it unfold the way you're talking about it. So I had a reaction to the idea of memorizing the state capitals, because memorizing them is pretty old school, right? It calls back to a time where you aren't going to be able to go get your encyclopedia off the shelf and look up the capitals. Like, you have to have that working knowledge in your mind, if you will, to have any sense of geography and whatever you might be doing. And it was pretty binary. Like, it really wasn't easy to access knowledge like that. So you really did have to like memorize these things. Math, multiplication tables get cited often and whatnot for fluency in thinking and whatnot. So I don't think that goes away, that need, but it's different because we have such easy access to AI. And so there isn't this like dependency on you're the only source of that knowledge. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to go get it. But it doesn't take away the need to have that working understanding of the world and so many things in order to do the heavier lifting thinking that we're talking about and the big skills. And I don't think there's a lot of research on that in between piece. Like, how do you teach for that level of knowledge acquisition and internalization and whatnot? And how do you then have a more seamless integration with the use of that knowledge in the age of AI when it's so easily accessible? So that feels like a really interesting frontier to me. It doesn't look exactly the same as what we've been doing, but isn't totally in a different world either. It is responsive and reflective of the technology we have and how it will get used now.
Yeah, no, it's a helpful push because like what I'm not saying is that no, everything in school is fine. I don't think I've ever talked to a superintendent who would say, "Oh, I'm feeling good about our assessment strategy." Like we've known that, and because really what you're describing is assessments. What are we assessing in terms of knowledge, which becomes the driver and incentive structure for teachers to like, because to your point, are you spending 5 weeks just memorizing capitals, or are you spending 2 weeks and then also then saying, okay, now that you've learned that, I want you to actually apply that knowledge and like come up with a political campaign for governor of, a state that you learned about, and like tell us about like why you're going to be picking those, tell us about your campaign platform, right? And, like how is it connected to what you learned about the geography of that state? So it's like integrating project-based learning and more engaging and relevant learning experiences. And then like the mix and the balance of what's happening in the classroom is sort of, and this is the challenging thing, because it's like the assessments will inform that, but it's also the assessments are downstream of sort of like, it's not just about getting the assessments right, but it's like, why are we assessing these things? And so that you very quickly get to like, well, like, what is the future of work? And because like, yeah, I mean, like you probably don't need to learn the Dewey Decimal System anymore, even though being able to like navigate knowledge is maybe one of the most important certainly something I use every day.
One of the things we tend to do in US education, Alex, is be so US centric, and we forget that other people on the planet might be grappling with some of these things. I know you track a lot of what happens around the globe. What could we look at as models or interesting, experiments or explorations? Everything from like big system change work, which I know we have different systems across the world, so that's different. It's a little bit, it's not a groundswell, it's a top down, but like anything from policy, big system, all the way down to like who might be doing interesting things in the classroom. Where are you looking for inspiration or models across the globe?
I mean, South Korea is a really interesting case study. You mentioned South Korea, I think, at the beginning of this, during the intro. We're just in headlines because they had done this big push. They would like roll out personalized learning nationwide, and then they announced that they're rolling back or sort of slowing down or pausing on the strategy. I forget if it's a rollback or a pause, but they're basically like, wait, this isn't working. And what they found is that they hadn't made a requisite investment in the teacher capacity. And that was a clear, and so part of the reason I'm tracking that is because I don't know that there's very much for us to learn from what any school is doing right now beyond, like, there's a lot for us to learn in the sense of, like, how can we empower how do we empower teachers to run with this stuff, because they are doing that. Like, I think there's a lot to learn from a mechanical standpoint of like implementation strategies. But I don't know that anybody has figured this out, because like nobody can yet describe what the future of work looks like. And I know this because the AI companies can't even describe what the future of work looks like. You had like Dario Amodei at Anthropic 7 months ago saying in 6 months, 90% of code is going to be written by AI, which is not the case, not even close.
And Amazon's going to lay off 30,000 white collar workers this week.
Which they did, yes. And so you have, but is that really because of AI, or is that because of overhiring from interest rates? And it is like, so until we answer this question of like, what is like, and really the way to say what is the future of work is like to put it in educational terms. How are you going to add value to the labor market? And like David Otter has this like example, which I think is really important. It's like, the crosswalk coordinator versus the air traffic controller. And like we pay the air traffic controller 4 times as much because any one of us could go be a crosswalk coordinator like today, just give us a vest and a stop sign. I assume you're not moonlighting as an air traffic controller. I'm certainly not. It would take us, I think, I don't know what the process is, but I think years to acquire the expertise. And so there is this barrier of expertise to do certain things. And what AI will do is lower the barriers to entry for certain types of expertise, things like writing, things like math. And so in those environments where AI is increasingly going to be automating certain types of expertise, then, well, for people to still get wages that are good or to be employed, they have to be adding something additional. And so the question of like, what are the humans adding? Again, we get to stuff like durable skills. We get to stuff like a human in the loop. But I think it's much more nuanced than that. And the reason I know that is because, there's the MIT study. I think it was a survey, but let's call it I think they call it a study. So there was a study from MIT that found that 95% of businesses' AI implementations failed, like have not been successful. So really what we're seeing is like, yes, AI is blowing up, but for the most part, most organizations have not actually cracked the code on like how to like unlock productivity and like, and so I think that there's actually quite a lot of business change management and organizational change that's coming. And so actually kind of trying to hone in on what does that look like, I think is maybe the key, because that will take 10 years. As if you look at computers like could have revolutionized businesses long before they ended up getting adopted. I mean, it took like decades actually for spreadsheets and things like that to become ubiquitous. And like Excel is a great example of something. I was just talking to this expert from the mobile industry who was talking about like the interesting thing about spreadsheets was it didn't just automate, because there were people who literally would handwrite, ledgers before Excel. And so obviously that work got automated. But the other thing that spreadsheets did was they created a new category of work, which is like the business analyst. Because before spreadsheets, there was really the only way to get that information was to like call somebody and sort of like compile it manually. And now you had a new way to look at information, which actually unlocked a new sort of function that didn't exist. And that meant like businesses now have teams of people that are like doing layers of analysis that they didn't realize that they could do before. And so
I wonder what you're saying is sparking two things for me. And again, we could talk probably all day, but we don't have all day. So sadly, I think this might be bringing us to a close here for the moment. But I'm curious what both of you think on this, because you brought up air traffic controllers, and in my new life and work, I'm very obsessed with careers and how people get into them and whatnot. I've done deep dives on air traffic controllers, and it's my macro point here is going to be, I do wonder if this moment of AI is also just exposing existing challenges and problems and bringing them to the forefront. Because let me be clear, training air traffic controllers in the US was a massive problem before AI came around, before any of this happened. It's a really messed up system. It is so constrained. It's not set up for success. Like, it's just such a disaster and a mess. And it's such a critical role that we have. And it's probably going to change with AI. Like, so you've just got all these things going on. And I'm wondering, Michael, from your perspective, is that what happens in these moments of disruption? And is that all predictable, and how do we get out of it? And then, Alex, you're talking about, I was having a conversation this morning about this idea that all these companies no longer are hiring sort of those entry-level analysts, or they're hiring far fewer of them. And my wondering is, no one can seem to answer this question yet. Great. Where's your manager coming from? Because if you don't employ any people at that level and they haven't sort of learned the business and learned things, what do you think? They're just sitting on the sidelines for 7, 8 years, and then they're ready to slide in there into, the roles that you are keeping. And so are these just problems that already existed that are now just being exposed? What's going on? What do you all think?
So first of all, we really don't know if I'm not convinced that the reason that there's high unemployment among college grads is because of AI. I think there was overhiring because of low interest rates. I think that companies are trying to free up cash flow to pay for the inference costs of these tools. And I think in general, like, we're there's going to be like sort of like boom and bust cycles in terms of hiring in general, and we've been in a really good period of high employment for a long time. I think what is clear is if you talk to like earlier stage companies, I was talking to a friend of mine at Cursor, which is like one of the big vibe coding companies, like blowing up, worth lots and lots of money. And I asked him about like, oh, like I keep hearing about like, companies aren't hiring entry level engineers anymore because like you're better off having someone with experience. And he's like, all of our engineers are in like their early 20s. Huh. Okay, that's interesting. He's like, well, yeah, because actually it's a lot faster and easier to train somebody who's an AI native who learned software engineering while vibe coding. But he's like, but we're a small organization that's like basically building out our structure as we go. So we don't have to like operate within sort of like the confines. I think there's going to be this like idea of like incumbent organizations, they have the existing hierarchy because ultimately you're looking for people who are like really fast learners, who can like learn new technology, who are adaptable and who are good at like doing hard stuff. If you're a small organization, you're probably better off just like hiring young people that like, have those instincts. If you're a large organization, what you might do is just maybe you're laying off some of the like the really slow movers and then retaining and promoting the people that are already in place, in seat, and have those characteristics. And then your point about like training the next generation, like law firms are thinking about this a lot because like you could automate all the entry level associates, but you do need a pipeline. But then you get to, do you need middle managers? I mean, like if the business models are less hierarchical because you just don't need all those layers, then maybe you don't worry so much about whether you need middle management, and it's more about, do you need more? I think what companies are going to realize is they actually need more systems thinkers and technology native employees that are integrated into other verticals of knowledge work that outside of tech. So like if you think about like marketing and like business and like customer success and like nonprofit world fundraising and policy analysts, like all of these teams that generally have like people from the humanities, I think companies are going to say, okay, how do we actually get people that like can do some vibe coding and have a little bit of like CS chops to build out some, much more efficient and productive ways for these teams to operate. But it's like nobody knows. I don't know, Michael. Like,
I love this point, Alex, where you're ending. And that like, and I like the humility, frankly, in a lot of the guests that we've had around this, is like the honesty that we're all guessing a little bit at this future and we're looking at different signals, right, as we do. I think my quick take off this, and I'll try to give my version of it, I guess, is you mentioned David Otter or Tor earlier at MIT, Alex, right? And part of his contention is that actually, right, it levels expertise between jobs that we've paid a lot for and jobs that we haven't. And more people, like, as opposed to technology that is increased inequality, this may be a technology that actually decreases inequality. And I guess it goes to my second thing, Diane, around what the question you asked, and air traffic control training is a great example. But like fundamentally, the organizations and processes we have in place have a very scarcity mindset. And I suspect they're going to fight change, and we're going to need new disruptive organizations, similar to what Alex was just saying, that look very differently to come in. And it gets to a little bit of, I think, what everyone says with technology, like the short-term predictions are huge. They tends to disappoint on that. The long-term change is bigger than we can imagine. And I guess I kind of wonder, is the long-term change what we, Alex, earlier on this season, we had Reed Hastings, and, he has a very abundant sort of society mindset where the robots plus AI plus probably quantum computing, like, are doing a lot of the things. Or is it, frankly, sort of what you, or I think Paul LeBlanc would argue, which is that a lot of these things that require trust, and we want people, like, yes, you can build an AI that does fundraising for you, but like, do I really trust both sides of that equation? I'd rather interact with someone, right? There's a lot of social capital that sort of greases these wheels ultimately in society. And I guess that's a bit of the question. And Diane, I guess part of me thinks, Carlota Perez, who's written about technology revolutions, right? She says that there will be some very uncomfortable parts of this, right? And a bit of upheaval. Part of me keeps wondering if we can grease the wheels for new orgs to come in organically. Can we avoid some of that upheaval because they'll actually more naturally move to paying people for these jobs in a more organic way. And right now we have I'm not sure we have that mindset in place. That's a bit of my question.
More questions than answers. More questions than answers, really. This has been, wow, really provocative.
This season of Class Disrupted is sponsored by Learner Studio, a nonprofit motivated by one question. What will young people need to be inspired and prepared to flourish in the age of AI, as individuals, in careers, and for civil thriving? Learner Studio is sponsoring this season on AI in education because in this critical moment, we need more than just hype. We need authentic conversations asking the right questions from a place of real curiosity and learning. You can learn more about Learner Studio's mission and the innovators who inspire them at www.learnerstudio.org. Alex, a segment we have on the show as we wrap up always is things we're reading, watching, listening to, either inside work or we try to be outside of work, podcasts, TV shows, movies, books, whatever it might be. What's on your night table or in your ear or in front of your eyes right now that you might share with us?
I'm reading a book about salt. It's called Salt.
This came out a few years ago. Yeah. My wife read it. Yeah.
I'm actually reading it for the second time. But it is, it's interesting because it's something that's like now you take for granted, but, there's a time when, wars were fought, it sort of spurred entire new sort of technologies around, like the Erie Canal was basically, like salt was a big component of, why we even built the Erie Canal. It's actually nicknamed the dish that salt built, spurring new mining techniques. And, I just find it fascinating that like, there are these, like technology is so interconnected. Not to bring it back, I know this is supposed to be outside, but I only read nonfiction, so it's going to be connected in some way. I just like fascinated by like, there are these sort of like layers behind the scenes that we sometimes take for granted that, can actually be like, quietly, monumental. I think what's cool about this moment with technology is it's like everybody's a part of this conversation. Like before it was like much more cloistered. And so I think that's just like good, even though yes, there's a lot of noise and hype and, snake oil and all that stuff. But I think in the general, like we are better off by like having folks like you, like asking people for like, like driving conversation about this and not just leaving it to a small group of experts to dictate.
So I think this is cheating, but I've done this one before, but I'm going to cheat anyway, because as you know, Michael, because you hear me talk about it a lot, the one news source I religiously read is called Tangle News. It's a newsletter now and a podcast. It's grown like crazy since I first started listening. I love it. It's like a startup. It started, I think when I started reading, it was like under 50,000 subscribers or something. Now up 500,000. Executive editor Isaac Saul, who I'm going to say this about a news person I trust, which I think is just a miracle. And I'm bringing it up this week because he wrote a piece last Friday that honestly I had to break over a couple of days because it was really brutal to read. That's just a very honest accounting of where we are in this moment. The best piece I've read or heard about it. And then on Monday, he did another piece where, they do what's the left saying, what's the right saying, what's his take, what are dissenting opinions. I just love the format. I love what they're doing. I was getting ready to write them a thank you note / love letter, which I do periodically. And I thought I'd just say it on.
I was going to say, now you can just excerpt this and send them a video clip.
So I hope people will check it out. I love the work they're doing. And I think you will too.
I'm going to go historical fiction, Diane. I'm like surprising you multiple weeks in a row here, I think, right? Yeah. Because Alex, I'm like you. I'm normally just nonfiction all the time, but I don't know. Tracy said you have to read this book, Brother's Keeper by Julie Lee. It's based on, it's historical fiction based on about a family's migration from North Korea to South Korea during the Korean War. It is a tearjerker. I was crying like literally sobbing as I was reading it tonight. And Tracy was like, "You okay?" And I was like, "I think I'm gonna go through the book," but I did, and it's fantastic. So we'll leave it there. But Alex, huge thanks. You spurred a great conversation. I'm looking forward to picking up a bunch of these strands as we continue. And for all you listening, again, keep the comments, questions coming. It's spurring us to think through different aspects of this and invite other guests who have good answers or at least the right questions and signals we ought to be paying attention to. So we'll see you next time on Class Disrupted.